The UK is the leading destination for Chinese investment in Europe, but questions have been raised after the British government took emergency measures to gain control of a Chinese-owned steelworks. Are concerns over national security founded, and what is the impact of China's investments in the UK and Europe? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Chinese investment into Britain has been surging, with Beijing ploughing almost £90 billion into companies listed on the FTSE 100. That's the UK's best-known stock market. But concerns over Chinese ownership in UK assets has been highlighted after the government's intervention into British steel, as China tries to assert global influence following its trade war with the US. Should we be wary of its investments?
China's global investments have grown hugely in recent years. The renewable energy market, infrastructure and technology are key areas of its investment. But the extent of China's interest in the UK has come under scrutiny. An emergency law has been passed to take control of Chinese-owned blast furnaces that make British steel, after fears the firm could shut down.
For British workers' security, for British industry's future, and without hesitation, in our national interest, and for the workers of British Steel, and for their families, this action today is essential.
China says it wants its UK-based companies to be treated justly.
It is hoped that the British government will treat Chinese enterprises fairly and impartially and protect their legitimate rights and interests, and to avoid politicising economic and trade cooperation, so as not to affect the confidence of Chinese enterprises in investing and cooperating in the UK.
The UK has been the third largest recipient of Chinese investment over the past 2 decades, receiving $104.7 billion between 2005 and 2024, behind the US and Australia. The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves has been building economic ties with China. She visited Beijing in January to help boost the UK's sluggish economy. China also invests in Germany, France and Hungary in areas such as batteries for electric vehicles, energy manufacturing and healthcare IT. At a time when Beijing is at the centre of a trade war with the US, it has warned countries against striking deals with the US at China's expense. America continues to be the biggest investor in Europe, despite China's efforts across the continent. How important is Chinese investment in Europe?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from Brussels, we have Linlin Liang. She is Director of Communication and Research. That's at the China Chamber of Commerce in the European Union. In Cambridge, in England, we have Matthew Agarwala. He's an economist and professor of sustainable finance at the University of Sussex. And in Bath, in England, we have Dr. Yukteshwar Kumar. He's senior lecturer in the Department of Politics, Languages and International Studies at the University of Bath. You're all very welcome back to Roundtable. Matthew, to you, we've heard this phrase, America first, for so long now. Do you think we should be actually talking about China first? Because that really is the Chinese policy.
Well, I think all countries, whether they ought to or not, will always put themselves first, right? Every country's politicians have an obligation to their electorate. Sometimes that obligation is more direct if we have a democratic system of governance. Sometimes it's less so if we're speaking about China. But the fact is that governments have an obligation to serve their constituents. And that has always been the case, and it always will be. So I see no real reason why countries shouldn't put themselves and their own populations first. The problem, however, is that the American manifestation of this, the new buzzword of America first, actually puts American jobs, American workers, American savers and households and pensioners at risk. It's actually undermining that economy and undermining their opportunities. China's policy is very different. China has been a fast-growing economy, although coming from a relatively weaker position. They have a lot of room to grow. But their policies, their industrial strategy has seen a real shift towards investing in renewable technologies, renewable energy, investing in becoming the world leader in the production of solar panels, and becoming a world leader in the production of electric vehicles. And that places China and its workers at the forefront of the modern 21st century economy. Absolutely, that's what it should be doing. Of course, there are concerns around the overuse of state aid. There are concerns around subsidies for key industries and even currency manipulation to boost exports. And for those reasons, the rest of the world needs to be wary of its engagements with China. So yes, China's policy will be China first. The rest of the world has to respond to this. And the one thing that we cannot do is we cannot take the US approach and attempt to cut China out of our economies. It is far too large and far too important. We have to engage, but we must do so strategically and with our eyes wide open to the risks and the opportunities.
Let's bring in Linlin. Just on that point, Linlin, how much power then globally does China have? Spell out for us the scale of Chinese investments globally.
Well, I fully agree with what Matthew just mentioned, that China actually has stayed as among the top investors globally with regard to the outbound investments. And in particular, if you look into the different sectors that China could be world leaders with regard investments regarding the solar panels, renewable energies, and then the batteries and associated supply chain as well. So in this regard, that I would say that China stays quite powerful with regard the investments, and it has put into a lot of efforts for decades, so through different kinds of projects all over the world. And there are also some specific things that we'd like to mention. For instance, the Chinese business, they are also looking to beyond the domestic market, looking overseas markets and try the different destinations. And we see that a lot of investments were channeled to, for instance, the Belt and Road Initiative associated countries, and we see a lot of investments went to the developing countries and in Africa and South Latin America, so on and so on. So there are a lot of interesting characteristics with the Chinese investments. But I would say that it's true to say that China stays quite powerful with regard to the global outbound investment. It is among the world's top investors with regard, in particular, those renewable sector and high-tech sectors.
Dr. Kumar, to you, we see some countries with quite a scattergun approach to investments. This Chinese project has been very carefully, strategically, and intelligently done, a lot of people would say.
Yes, you're talking about the project in the United Kingdom, about the steel project?
Everything. Chinese investments globally. I mean, they use a lot of foresight and planning. This is not haphazard in any way.
Yes. China plays Weiqi, a go game. China does not shout. China is like inviting you to a Chinese tea stall, talking about Confucius ideologies, and then while you're sipping tea, they will build roads, or, for example, in Pakistan, Gadar Port and other places in Sri Lanka, for example, or in Africa, or in Greece, or even in Europe. And now, as we know, in the UK in 2020, they invested here. And that was through the China Qingye Group. Now, obviously, there has been quite a lot of murmurs. Was the steel rescue, for example, here in the UK, a deliberate attempt to send the contracts back to China? Was it a steel hostage taking? Were the blast furnaces being strategically mothballed so that Chinese contracts in future could flourish instead? We do not have constructive proof. But then the suspicion itself is poisoned and has poisoned the well of politicians as well as public trust. Because in anywhere, whether it is infrastructure or investment, perception is half the contract. And as we know, the Chinese say, 不怕贼头,就怕贼点鸡. Translation, do not fear the thief who steals once. Fear the one who is always eyeing your house, who remember your house. So that's why it is critical infrastructures, whether it is steel, ports, or nuclear plants. They are different from luxury hotels or e-commerce applications. You can, for example, download an app and delete it. But when you allow an untrustworthy partner to your power grid or steel supply chain, it is not just about profitability, it is about sovereignty as well. So any country has to be careful.
Thanks, Dr. Kumar. Let's bring back in Matthew. Matthew, let's talk about British Steel then. So the town of Scunthorpe in the north of England, built on British steel. If you don't work there, someone in your family does. And it was bought by a Chinese company, Jingye. We've seen the fallout. The suspicion in the UK was that this was deliberately mismanaged so that huge contracts would go back to mainland China. How much has that, do you think, damaged the relationship between the UK's hunger for investment and growth and taking Chinese investment on board?
I think there are two things at issue here. First, we have to remember why Jingye was brought in to purchase what is now British Steel in the first place. It's not because this was a booming company with brilliant productivity and massive profits. They were brought in as a bailout. It was actually the British government that bailed it out back in 2019 and sought an external buyer, and the only one they could find was Jingye. So let's not pretend that the problems of the production of steel in the United Kingdom started just last month or so. That's absolutely not the case. We've also had steel plants in Port Talbot, which needed massive public investment, £500 million, partnered with Tata and other producers in order to transform those steel production works away from the blast furnaces towards the electric arcs. They were trying to do something similar here in Scunthorpe as well, but the Jingye company decided that the deal that was offered by the British government was not sweet enough. The UK is a very expensive place to produce steel. It's expensive to produce steel here because electricity prices are high, energy prices are extremely high here, and it's expensive to produce here because all of the other infrastructure is expensive and a little bit old and a little bit decaying. We have failed to invest in this industry properly for at least 30 or 40 years, and that's the reason why we're in this sort of position at the moment. So yes, more recently, over the past couple of years, there has been tension growing between Jingye and the UK. There has been tension growing between the unions and the ultimate customers who need to be purchasing those products. If steel is more expensive here in the UK to produce, then we have to have a very good reason why we think international markets or even domestic markets might purchase that steel. If it's that much more expensive, we have to have a really good justification and a good marketing and advertising program. If you look at, say, wind energy production in the UK, our new turbines that we're rolling out, only about 2% of the steel in those turbines is UK produced. And another major concern for this country is not so much the wars going on between US and China, but really we elected in a national bout of self-harm to leave the European Union. And if you look at the trade statistics, about 2/3 of the steel that the UK typically produces ended up in Europe. And about 2/3 of the steel that the UK typically imports came from Europe. So yes, the tariffs and the trade wars, and yes, the relationships with China are sensitive, but actually the UK's own decision makers have a huge amount of the culpability here.
Well, let's talk to Linlin about the relationship with the EU then. So, Linlin, what are we seeing with Europe? Is Europe now moving closer to China because of President Trump's tariffs? What do you think?
Well, on the ground in Brussels, I say the business community does feel that change of the vibe ever since, let's say, the beginning of this year. You can, given that there are a lot of rhetoric that are coming from Brussels, the EU bubble, you will see that the EU policymakers are sending the signals that they would like to expand, let me quote, they would like to expand the economic and investment deal or relations with China via striking that constructive deals with China. So we see that in 2024, the China-EU economic trade ties became bizarre a little bit because of a lot of the trade of bots with regard to EV, so on and so on. So a lot of sectors. But we are just seeing that all these kind of atmosphere started to change ever since that Donald Trump took place. And we see that now the China and the EU are engaging immediately. I remember in April that after the discussion between the China's Minister of Commerce with his EU counterpart, so the two sides decided to immediately restart the negotiations with the price compromise in the negotiations with regard to the EU. And we're also seeing a lot of high-level exchanges between the two sides. And I would say this is not only one-way streets, actually, that the two sides seems to the business community that the two sides are simultaneously extending the olive branches to each other. So this is actually very promising. So let's say we really welcome these positive sides which we have recorded ever since the beginning of this year.
Yukteshwar, back to you. This is obviously a relationship that benefits both the European Union and China, two huge markets. I mean, it's obvious they're going to get closer if America is pushing both away.
Oh, of course. But one should understand that whether China and EU coming together, is it a marriage of convenience, or is it like you going to a party and seeing your ex over there and trying to think, okay, now the other person has been divorced or getting into problem, but do I have any bit benefit later on with my own ex? Because both the sides, China and EU, they are very, very big. China is one of the largest countries and massive. I'm not only talking about the Great Wall of China or the hot pot restaurants in Chengdu and Chongqing, but I'm talking about 600 million middle-class people. And of course, Europe wants access to China's enormous, this consumer base. The growing middle class in China is much fastly growing than a queue for dumpling during the Chinese New Year. And similarly, China also wants European technologies, brands, investment credibilities. You might have seen quite a lot of Douyin or Redbook and other things, which is like in the UK, Reels on Facebook, in which the Chinese builders or manufacturers, they're manufacturing things for, let's say, 20 pounds, but all these with the brand name in Europe, whether it is Italian or German or Spanish brand names, and they are being sold for thousands of pounds. So, of course, both the sides.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Matthew, back to you. You get the impression there's a little bit of a bitter aftertaste in the UK with the British Steel story and China and Jingye. However, the fact remains China has about £90 billion worth of investments in FTSE 100 companies in the UK. So they're not going away. I mean, this is serious investment in the United Kingdom.
Yes, I mean, I think that's right. The chronic complaint of the UK economy is that it has not attracted investment. And this has led to a slowdown in productivity growth, which is the real reason that real wages aren't rising. It's the real reason that living standards are stagnating. It's a lack of investment. It's the reason that our companies are not as competitive and our people do not earn as much. It's why we can't deliver the growth in the quality and the quantity of public services that people in this country would like to expect. And it's all because of this lack of investment, leading to a lack of capital per worker, leading to a lack of productivity growth. Now, if the UK is not willing to invest in itself, and UK investment as a share of GDP is about 17% or 18% of GDP, if you look at developed economies in Western Europe or in North America, they're all above 20%. Canada, the US, 22, 24% of GDP is invested, whereas we're down at 17. So if we won't invest in ourselves, if the British people will not invest in Britain, they must seek investment from somewhere. The US is retracting from the rest of the world, although it has previously been a major investor in this country under the Marshall Plan after the Second World War. China is the place in the world that is ramping up its global investments. We see this in the Belt and Road Initiative, which has been running for some years, delivering critical infrastructure projects all around the world. But we also see it in the establishment of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is essentially a development bank kind of designed to replicate, duplicate, possibly rival what the World Bank does, which is deliver concessional finance backed by its own AAA rating to reduce the cost of investment in major infrastructure projects around the world. China is stepping up. Now, if the UK won't do it itself, then we're going to have to find it from somewhere else, and it might well be Chinese investment. But that does leave us open to these risks that potentially the Chinese investors may not have the UK's best interests at heart. That is always a possibility. However, if they are investing in this country, there is some rationale for them to want it to succeed. Otherwise, those investments just don't deliver a return.
Thanks, Matthew. Linlin, to you, what do you say to commentators then who say Chinese investment is all well and good, but you can't trust the Chinese because ultimately a Chinese company's loyalty will be to Beijing? I'm sure you've heard that accusation before.
Right, we heard of this time and time again. So, okay, from the Chinese business perspective, we do think that the investments, you should not judge that, they should not be judged by where they're from. And this is very important. This should be served as a principle if you deal with the investments, in particular if you want to be open to the investments from the outside world. And apart from that, I think that we see the trend that a lot of the for instance, in Europe, that the countries, they tighten the grip on the FDI and they strengthen the scrutiny on the Chinese investment in particular, and they also develop a mode towards unilateral towards to review all kinds of investment, and sometimes they want to track down the investments even several years ago. So all this actually creates a quite uncertain investment environment for the investors. I would like to say not only Chinese companies are worried about this trend, but also for other foreign investors. But back to your question, very intriguing question. We would have to say, of course, that you can raise doubts of a lot of issues and things, but let's have the holistic picture on how Chinese is performing or how these investments are performing. China has a track record of that, to promote this economic interest that in domestically and globally. And we see that China remains very popular for foreign investors in its own country. And Chinese companies, they manage to establish trustful relationship and partnership with our European partners and UK partners, so on and so on, all over the world. Let's see a lot of examples. For instance, China and its partners managed to deliver in the third party, in a third country. So we are very confident that actually, if on the business level or on the national level, China stands first for very appealing to the foreign investment. It's a very proud business in itself. It's improving its business environment for the investors itself. And on the other hand, I think I will conclude back to what I just said. China and the Chinese companies, we have the track record of being reliable and trustful.
A topic we will no doubt revisit this year on Roundtable. Thank you, Yukteshwar, Linlin and Matthew Agarwala as well. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.